you want to boost credibility, you want to show, not tell. What I mean by that is don't tell people how great you are, instead show them.
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
Hey, and this is Jack from emailsthatsell.com. How do you make a perfect stranger believe you're an expert after a single cold email? The answer has to do with using the psychology behind authority and credibility. In today's episode, you'll pick up the 3 one-liners that can turn prospects into believers, even if you're in an industry filled with shady competitors. Next, you'll learn how to borrow all the authority you'll ever need from others when you're first starting out. And finally, you'll see what it means to show and not tell, and why it matters if you want to close sales today. Enjoy. All right, Jeremy, here we are, yet another podcast. What are we talking about today?
Well, today we had a question from one of our listeners, actually. He's not getting enough responses, and he seemed to believe that this is due to credibility or authority in his email. So he just basically asked us if he's got some advice on how to establish more credibility or authority in his email.
Cool. So right off the bat, how might you know if you've got a credibility problem on your hands? Is there any way we can find that out when we're sending cold email?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, and bummer, I didn't prepare for this one, Jack. So I think I'm going to pass. I'm going to listen to your answer and maybe add some stuff on top.
To me, if you have a product offering that is obviously a huge win for whoever takes it up, maybe you could say, let's take an example. If you've got a piece of software that essentially replaces an entire VA's role, maybe you're able to crunch a spreadsheet so that you don't need a list cleaner on your team, basically. And the price point is really low. To me, that would sound like an obvious, yes, let's go ahead and implement this decision if they only believed it would happen.
Yeah, it's the too good to be true kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Like, yeah, that's nice, but I don't believe you. That's where I think you may run into credibility issues. If you've really got something that should be flying off the shelves, but it's not, I think that's when you need to take a look at how you can make people trust you a little bit faster.
Yeah, at the same time, I think your question still remains in the sense that how do you know that they're not responding to you because it's a credibility issue and not something else?
Well, if you're not getting responses, you'll never know. You'll just be guessing what's the problem. But if you are getting replies like, no thanks, and maybe you dig a little deeper by handling that reply saying, oh, would you mind telling me? Then that's where answers might come out, just finding out why people ignored or followed up negatively with you.
Okay, so that makes sense. So let's say I'm getting a few rejection, dig a little bit deeper, figured out that actually no one believes me. So, or maybe I have a personal credibility issue in a sense that I'm just starting up. I believe actually that sometimes the credibility issue comes from a personal perception. It's like, I don't believe I got enough credibility, and therefore it's a bit like, oh, I love this sort of story. I'm sorry for the slight digression, guys, but I think it's a cool one. It always strikes me, if you look at the small kid starting karate, for example, he will look for every symbol of mastery of karate. So he will want to wear the badge, he will want to wear the belt, and stuff like that. And if you look at the master doesn't really care of any of this, right? He's got the credibility within him. He doesn't actually need to display it outside. And I think it's the same thing when we actually start maybe in business or things like that. We crave for, how can I get more credibility instead of that silence, peace of mind and confidence in your own stuff. But if we put this aside and we're effectively trying to boost credibility, then what can we do, Jack?
If you want to boost credibility, you want to show, not tell. What I mean by that is don't tell people how great you are, instead show them. I think back to the billboards that are probably still up there on the highways that you're driving past every day of the iPhone ads where they say, shot on the iPhone 10. And it's just a billboard with a giant, beautiful photo. Now, notice that they chose to advertise a picture taken with an iPhone instead of using that billboard space to say the iPhone 10 has the most modern camera with, however many dozens of megapixels. And they're not listing features. It's just, look how great this is. By the way, that was shot with an iPhone, and that's the whole ad. That's showing, not telling. And I think in cold email, if we want to build credibility, we need to do that.
So how do I actually show instead of tell with a cold email?
So we're going to use 3 things. And by the way, these 3 things I'm going to cover are explained in extreme detail on our authority and social proof episodes, which are episode 35 and 56 respectively. But you've got mini case studies that are going to help you show, not tell. You've got relevant testimonials that will help you show, not tell. And finally, you've got powerful stats, concrete stats that help you show instead of tell. So basically, you're going to lean on what you've done and just highlight results instead of saying that we're the best. Big difference there.
Damn, you just knocked on like a few of my points, but I'm going to add to this one.
Good.
So basically, you can also, what I say, borrow credibility from someone else. Instead of just saying like, we're so great at doing support, for example, at QuickMail, I just go ahead and say, most of our users love our support and tell us how great it is. So by doing indirection and actually not saying it yourself, then it's more credible in that sense.
Great point there.
And the other thing about metrics you mentioned quickly, like stats, if you feel not confident in your stats, let's say, for example, let's say you're something like Skillshare or Udemy or some sort of website where you got some students on it. And let's say you're not totally confident or secure in the fact that you only, in quotes, have, let's say, 1,000 students active per month. You could still go ahead and then just talk about the number of people who registered. So maybe they got 12 million people registering for their website, even for, they only have like a couple of hundreds, active user on a monthly basis. So you can rely on vanity metrics and let the user connect the dots and extrapolate on those metrics for the real stats, basically.
That's very true. And if you're listening without a lot of sexy stats that you're able to drop into an email, just keep in mind, like Jeremy said, you're able to pick and choose what you want to highlight in order to establish yourself as an authority figure. So I had a friend, or thankfully I still have a friend, who is switching over basically from an employee work to starting her own company. And it doesn't matter what industry she's in for the story, but basically she thought that she didn't have any credibility or why would anybody trust her to hire her, right? But if you looked at her resume, she's been in that industry for 15 years. And so that's, even though she's brand new to this particular business, her industry experience can just put her on a level playing field where just dropping in, let's say how long or how many projects she's been a part of, then that's a way that she's able to give herself more of a expert view on this, even though she's brand new to this company she's starting. So one side note I want to point out is whenever you send a cold email, if it truly is cold and the recipient has never met you or doesn't know your name, you always have to think about ways to establish credibility, because if you approach someone on the street and try and pitch them something, you've got to battle through making sure they trust you and like you and believe that you will be able to deliver what you promise. When you send a cold email, if the person doesn't know you, you're essentially asking them to trust a stranger. And why not make it easy on them to believe you by throwing in these case studies, testimonials, and stats within your cold email message?
It's like in bowling, you're, in front of the bowling alley, you got all your pins here. And, you don't have to have the strike on the first go. You can also do it in a follow-up. So that means you can get a few pins down and you still wouldn't get the answer yet. So you want in your follow-up to make sure you address the other pins, so you end up having a strike, right?
So in other words, you're saying maybe in the first email, you use the case study. Second follow-up, you put the testimonial. And third, you go with a stat, right?
Yeah, that's entirely right. Another good way of getting credibility is to borrow it from someone else. Let's say, for example, we're both fan of John Doe, who is someone. And if I actually come and say, John Doe said X, and so product solves this. All right, bummer, he's right. We got X as a problem, and I know John Doe, so automatically, associate this credible argument to what you're saying.
That's true. So I've used that in a campaign where the company that I was sending cold emails for was fortunate enough to have a major influencer within their industry use their product. So in one of the very first emails that we put together, it sort of said like, this person said XYZ about product. Do you have the same concern? And it worked amazingly because many people knew this famous person in the industry. And if she said something about XYZ and they could relate to it, it was very easy to get them to the next step. So I love the idea of borrowing credibility from other people. So yeah, I've got one more way that you can establish credibility. And this is for the business owner that's maybe been in the game for a little while. You know what objections your prospects typically bring up. My recommendation, if you want to establish credibility, is handle those objections in the email. Because remember in the beginning of the cast, we said people may read your email, and even if it's a great product, they may say, yeah, but it sounds too good to be true. Well, my recommendation is handle that, explain what's the catch in the email. So you take away their thought process of, yeah, this can't possibly be working. Why should I trust a stranger who says they could deliver? Perfect example. Oh, by the way, we're able to deliver this at such a lower cost because we don't actually have anybody on site that needs to meet with you. Instead, it's all done virtually. If the objection is, I don't believe this, can completely vaporize it.
Yeah, love it. I mean, I'm a big fan of using the PS for that. It's like, by the way, probably shouldn't have to say that, but the reason why we can get such a great cost is because X, right? And that way, like you said, it's just, flip people on the head and suddenly say, okay, then maybe that is true, and then get some curiosity here.
I like that.
Another thing I like as well is just no string attached. This is, and then you explain the reason why. This is, maybe a bet between a few friends that I have to honor, whatever, whatever it may be. But basically give the ground or the explanation as to why it could sound like too good to be true.
Okay, did I say I had one last one the last time I spoke? I've got one more.
You did, but I got a few ones, so you can go ahead.
Okay, good. That's usually how it works once we get rolling. So this is a tip for my consulting amigos out there. If you want people to believe you're worth your salt, don't leave it up to them to wait until they invest a couple grand with you before they figure out if you know your stuff or not. Instead, early on in the conversation, freak them out with something really valuable that you can send to them, ideally if they request it. But if you're able to shoot over an email that's got 2 suggestions for their sales team that actually work and they haven't thought of, there's a good chance you might be able to get them on the phone to see what else you have up your sleeve. So don't leave it up to some of these 3 case studies, testimonials, or stats we've talked about. Sometimes you can just say, hey, it's basically like a sample at the grocery store. You try the pretzel, it's way better than you expected. You buy the bag. And I think us consultants can keep that in mind. By the way, if you are maybe interested in consulting or you just have like a cold email question in general, I'm happy to field your email and reply with something that will dazzle you just because you're a listener. And if you love it so much, you know where to contact me about consulting. So feel free to drop me a line, jack@emails@sell.com. Tell me you found me on the podcast. I'll be happy.
And I would say also humble brag in your signature can actually be a good sign of authority. Like, just a super small font, like saying like, by the way, I've been speaker on, about this subject, super massive conference. Or if you have something really big,
it's not a
just
humble
disguise
brag.
it as something
That's not
small.
a humble brag.
Is it not? Is it not? Okay,
A
cool.
humble
I'm
brag
gonna learn
is-
something here.
A humble brag would be, gosh, it's such a drag when you have to go to so many airports while I'm on this consulting speaking tour. It's, talk about jet lag. I'm flying around the world doing speeches. Oh man, what a bummer.
Okay, I got it. So, maybe not exactly the right terminology here, but you can play around with your signature by, trying to minimize some of your massive success if you have a few of them, so that you don't look like complete, a-hole, just
That's true.
bragging
But-
about your success.
Right, because we want to make sure that you don't come across as arrogant. That rarely
That's right.
works when it comes to establishing authority or really just getting people to like and trust you, which to me are some of the most important elements of the sales process.
Maybe we're completely wrong on this. It could simply be that, sending a small cold email that's saying like, hey, wants to work with the number 1 cold email expert on the world. Maybe that would work. I don't believe so, but
It's a superlative, right? Like you brought up a fabulous point, Jeremy. That to me is the opposite of show, don't tell.
That's right.
That's trying to get people to buy that you're pro, when instead there's other ways you can lay the groundwork so that, your reply rate isn't a gamble going up and down like a bouncing ball. Instead, if you put these authority building sort of tips inside your cold emails, the idea is you'll have a much more steady stream of replies that trust that what you have to say is accurate.
Okay, so question for you. Imagine you're thinking about your business owner, you're thinking about cold email, you do want to go ahead and then do cold email. You don't quite have the time to search for a cold email expert. And then you got this email that comes and say, hey, by the way, I want to work with the best, or the most qualified cold email experts on the planet. Would you actually reply and then check it out still, or what?
What that has going for it is it's very specific. And if I was, now keep in mind, maybe I'm thinking I need to do a better job with outbound. And if that's the case, I'm not sure I would bite on this. But if my mentality was, man, I really need to find a cold email guy, maybe it would work. But
and then come knock on your door. Yeah,
I don't think that's the best angle you can take ever. So would it work? Like I said, only if it was really top of mind for me, but you could do better, guys.
I totally agree. It's funny how, we come back full circle, which is you can have the best copy, but if your list is not good, they won't buy it. But the opposite is more likely. So you could have the worst copy, but if your list is dying for it, then they will still, try a bite of it.
And it's not just a saying or something Jeremy and I have fun talking about in theory on this show. I have several examples where somebody has hired me to re-engage old leads. And this was just for not even cold email. This is classic email marketing, MailChimp kind of stuff, right, guys? And all I did was I sent this re-engagement email that just reminded them why they were on this list. And that heads up, we'll be sending a few more things their way. And that email pulled in a ton of customers for this person. It was just like, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this topic. If you got a great list, then life is easy. Focus on the list, people.
So I got a last one on credibility and authority, and it's dropping their competitor name if you can. Could be simple like, such and such had big problem, and especially if you actually worked with one of their competitors. So, hey, we've been working with competitor X, and, it worked for them. Is that something that you're considering for your company? In that way, that plays on multiple levels here, but automatically you're credible because you worked with a company like them that compete with them. So you don't need to say anything else than, we work with your competitor, it worked, and then automatically you got credibility and authority.
And a bunch of curiosity behind that because they probably want to know what their competitor's using to get an edge.
Hell yeah.
That's a great idea. Just, I have to say, be a little careful because you don't necessarily want to be the guy who's dangling this secret information about competitors. So I totally agree with you, Jeremy. Just word it in a way so it sounds like you're their bud that's writing this email saying hey, by the way, this seems pretty helpful. Competitor X used it to do XYZ. That's all you really need to say. No need to drive the knife any further into the chest. So just drop it in passing and it's going to work very good.
Yeah, you don't even need to mention its competitor. You could say hey, we worked with company X and Y and it proved to be very well. And it happens that company Y is their competitor.
That's beautiful. And if you're listening to the show, you can use this tip, assuming you've had one customer in your entire life. All you have to do is take that customer and find lookalike customers that sort of model their exact business. You can use the strategy. It works really well, especially if it's early on in your campaign. Why not start with something that I would call the low-hanging fruit? If you can't get someone who's an exact match of your customer to reply to an email where you mentioned a competitor that used it to benefit XYZ, by the way, drop in a concrete stat behind what they were able to do with whatever your service product was. If you can't get someone to reply to that, you've got bigger problems. And so it's a good place to start.
That's right. All right, Jack, any last thing you want to say?
Just keep in mind, we all have to prove our worth anytime we do cold email. So give these tips a good thought before you fire off and send cold emails. And I hope it helps your reply rates.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jeremy. See you.
So there you go. you have a lot of tools to choose from if you feel you lack credibility and authority, or if your prospect find it hard to believe you or your product are up for the task. As we've seen, authority can be inferred or borrowed. For example, you can write things that will make your prospect think you have credibility, like mentioning 20 million registered users instead of the 100 active users you have. Or you can mention recognizable people to gain authority, like a quote from a celebrity in your niche. Next, remember our conversation about show instead of tell. Use mini case study or a proxy like a quote and testimonials to prove you're an expert. Finally, since some prospects are more receptive to some influence factors than others, do not hesitate to combine multiple ways of conveying authority over multiple follow-up emails.
Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high vibe by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher or TuneIn. That works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast
So they can send awesome emails.
and make everyone's inbox a better place. Thanks.